Hi, I'm Janet Gross. Welcome to Coping Today, a place where we talk about mental health and well-being. Sometimes we talk about what everyone's talking about in the office and at home, and this is one of those topics: crime, reducing crime or getting away from it. Dr. Roy Salgado, professor of counseling at the University of Holy Cross, joins us as always to talk things over. And it is a topic that is too often it's difficult to avoid these days because it affects everybody and it's out there and you know, we're all talking about it.
Right, and you don't necessarily have to be the direct survivor of a criminal event. You know, maybe you haven't had a home invasion, maybe you haven't been attacked by someone or robbed or carjacked. But the fact that it's happening with such frequency, not only in our area, but throughout the country, it really does put most everyone on alert. And with that being on high alert and that hypervigilance, the anxiety that ensues and the fear that perhaps sets in, and people are adjusting their behaviors and things of that nature as a result of the crime that is surging. Right,
because even, you know, cities not vying for, but are put on that most murder capital or, you know, most robbery. That's horrible when you rank them. You know?
Right, and then when you find that your city and your community is on that list time after time, and then when you hear more anecdotally about the crime that took place down the street or down the road or next door, then you really are on high alert because, like, you know, that could have been me type of situation. You know, these acts of violence that occur appear to be random in some instances, but if it is random, you know, if person A got carjacked on the corner of this street and that street, who's to say that you wouldn't be someone that could potentially have been the victim of a carjacking or a burglary or an assault of some nature? And so that's what makes it that much more difficult for everyone involved, because you don't have to be the survivor of an event in order to have the vicarious trauma associated with crime.
Which makes sense that this can be a mental health issue, even if you're not a crime victim.
Right.
Because it's always on your mind.
Right. Because if you're not the direct victim or survivor of a criminal event, but you're experiencing the symptoms associated with hypervigilance, with apprehension, with fear, adjusting your behaviors, all of these are symptoms associated with anxiety, associated with other types of mental health conditions. And it is a mental health issue. It's a wellness issue that all of us are having to contend with these days.
Because it really is hard not to put yourself in somebody else's place, especially if it's a neighbor or somebody you know. You're like, oh, what would I have done? What is that noise? You know, all those things.
All too often we do hear, you know, of these stories. You know, we empathize with our citizens, with our residents in our area, that when we see the news, this happened to so-and-so and these horrific events, we all empathize with it, and we all can identify that could have been me, that could have been my mother, that could have been my wife, that could have been my child. And so these are real people with real hearts, with real minds, with real lives that are being impacted by these criminal events.
And then I think when those are on your mind all the time, the other part that accompanies it is, what am I going to do about it?
Right.
What should I do? Am I doing the right thing? You know, all those issues now about, should I stay? Should I go? Should I put a glass along the fence? You know.
Right. You know, people, you know, talking about these security measures. You know, do I put extra cameras up? Do I put up a fence or a wall? Do I get iron gates? Do I move altogether? You know, and people with limited resources perhaps don't have the options to add those cameras or put up that fence or buy that, you know, iron door or move altogether. Not everybody has those resources, and so people feel more vulnerable if they feel unprotected, if they feel insecure because of the things that we're hearing about.
So you have decisions to make, and a lot of it is based on what ifs.
What ifs. And that's a very interesting thing, because the mind has a very interesting way of playing over and over and over again those what if scenarios. What if someone breaks in the front door? What if someone, you know, holds me at gunpoint at the corner of this street and that street? And we oftentimes are our own worst enemy with those what if scenarios. We can paralyze ourselves into not living life, you know, and, you know, we don't want to dissuade people from living their lives. We want people to be able to go out and enjoy all the wonderful things that life has to offer. But at times it seems like it may not necessarily be the best thing for us, because we have heard of these stories that induce fear.
Okay, well, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about some mental health strategies that may help reduce future crime rates even. So stay with us.
You're there for them. We're here for you. Find free care guides at aarp.org/caregiving.
We're joined now by Dr. Lisa Surrency, licensed professional counselor and University of Holy Cross alum. Thanks for joining us first, Dr. Surrency. We appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Sure. I know that you work with Catholic Charities. And what are you and other counselors at Catholic Charities seeing in clients when it comes to rising crime rates? I mean, we have them in this area for sure. So, I mean, it's obviously, probably, I'm saying, comes into play in many people's mental health.
Absolutely. And, I think that the first thing is to not go to that stereotypical crime. We're seeing it everywhere, higher income housing, low income housing across different parishes, different cities. So it's not just, I think a lot of people equate crime to like the New Orleans and surrounding area, but it's not just New Orleans and the surrounding area. Like it's our entire state that is overcome with this these days. And, we've seen both sides of the coin, the people who have committed the crimes, but also people who have been the victim of a crime. And I think it is kind of important for us to understand why someone has done something or how they have felt about being the victim of a crime, rather than like punishing them and just giving them a consequence, rather than helping them figure out what was inside of them to commit the crime, and then how do they continue on in society without being stereotyped that they are a criminal and that they're going to do this again. I think one of the great things about Catholic Charities is we do have many different programs, and we are currently, for our counseling program, we actually just have started a collaboration with our reentry program to help those incarcerated individuals who are coming out of the system basically readjust to their life before they became incarcerated. And so we're helping them to try to navigate that with offering them housing, with offering them resources, coping skills, how to really control their mental health now so they do not become a statistic and end up back in the system.
Man, recidivism is it happens so often. I guess you're teaching kind of how not to go down that path?
Right. Yes. I will say that one of the best things that we can do as individuals, and specifically as mental health professionals, is establish maybe a pattern of behavior and how to break that pattern of behavior so we're not continuously going through that. Or also they're not passing it along to other individuals in their communities, in their families, friends, in their inner circles as well. How can we break that cycle and pattern of behaviors?
And I truly appreciate that effort in terms of reduction of crime, going to the source, the individuals that perhaps had, unfortunately, for one reason or another, turned to engaging in a criminal act, and then the consequences, they're in prison, but now they're out. Oftentimes that recidivism rate is increased because the resources aren't there.
Right.
They come out into society and people run away from them. And maybe they are looking for a second opportunity or a second chance, or wanting to acquire skills to be able to assimilate into a new way of being. And to have Catholic Charities and other institutions be able to offer that to them and offer them a second chance is a wonderful way to reduce that crime rate. And so I applaud Catholic Charities for those efforts.
Me too. Sometimes it just takes somebody to stand alongside you.
Yes.
In so many instances, including this, I guess.
Because people who commit crimes, they got there somehow. How do they get there?
Yeah.
What happened to let them to commit this act or the other? What can we do as part of a community to help reduce that? And if there's something that we can do, whether it be through our organizations, our churches, what have you, that we make those efforts.
And of course, let's also talk about the people who are victims or who are afraid to become a victim and that kind of situation. I mean, obviously you want to protect yourself, but you also want to be upstanding about it. We were talking during the break about knowing the difference between being afraid of a situation and maybe someone and stereotyping someone. So you don't want every time, like if you're a young woman and a man is on the other side of the street at night, you just, don't need to freak out necessarily.
Right. Yeah, we don't want to stereotype. We don't want to profile someone. At the same time, it's important to trust that gut instinct. Our bodies are able to pick up on things and pick up on cues of what could potentially be a threat. Listen to that. It might look like stereotyping. It might look like profiling. But it's important to trust that gut instinct. And so if that means that you see someone on an elevator and you might want to wait for that next one to come by, that might be something that could save your life in that moment. And it's okay. It's okay. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are being prejudicial towards someone. You're engaging in a self-protective act in that moment.
Mm-hmm. So in counseling, you said you kind of do both of those at Catholic Charities. You see both ends, the person who's committed the crime and the victim of crime. I guess, are you also seeing people who are just on the periphery, just people who live in a neighborhood where the crime is high or see it on the news all the time and they're concerned and they want to get out and they don't know what to do?
Absolutely. I think, one of the downfalls in this century is the fact of a heightened social media presence. And I think some of those individuals rely more on social media than, for the news rather than actually hearing the news itself. Or, you can be in an area where you are exposed to crime, but that doesn't mean that the crime is going to happen again. Sometimes it could be like a specific targeted person, so that's going to nothing to do with you. But it's also helping people realize that that's okay to have those fears. But let's talk about how you cope with those fears so it doesn't impact your daily functioning. And I think that's unfortunately what the pandemic has taught us, is that isolation can really hold on to those fears and intensify them, especially in moments of crime or where you've witnessed it or you've heard about it. I know during the break or before, y'all were also talking about vicarious trauma. And I think sometimes people who don't experience the crime themselves but witness it or hear about it can also experience that trauma that is connected to a crime, and helping them really process those feelings so they can continue to function in daily life. And I think that's so important for them to understand why themselves, but also create a safety net for them so they're not hindered or paralyzed by that fear of going out again or staying in the same neighborhood, those types of things.
And it is important for us to be wise and cautious and be preventative in nature and to keep ourselves safe. I mean, we have a responsibility to ourselves and our families to keep ourselves safe. At the same time, we have a responsibility to not drop away from society altogether. We have to engage with others. We can't isolate and lock up our doors and pull up the moat, right there. We can't have that drawbridge come up. It's just not healthy for us. We need to be able to go out there and be in community with others. And so going to the festivals and going to the movies and going to family events, going to the park, we have to do these things. And when we go out and do those things, be aware, be mindful, be in tune to the fact that, crime does happen, and we just need to be vigilant.
So how do you get past the fear, the anxiety, the nervousness about going out? How do you get beyond that so that that does not become a mental health issue for you? Dr. Sorensen?
I would say, well, go ahead, Dr. Sorensen.
Okay, well, I think it goes by just making sure that you're of the healthiest mindset, making sure you are reaching out to someone, a professional, a support system if you don't have the funds or the way to find mental health professionals. But I think that is the key, is making sure you are reaching out to those resources, making sure you're being as proactive as you can be in combating those fears, as far as like, if I'm preparing myself to go out and I know I have a fear of going to a festival and there was just a shooting at a festival, well, that can't stop you, but I'm going to be more vigilant about how I'm feeling myself. Since I'm a counselor, I'm going to go to another counselor to get help with that situation, but also putting myself in a safety plan. If I hear gunshots or if I hear, just something, a commotion, like how am I going to get to safety first? Rather than, in situations like this, they're always that fight, flight, or freeze response. And how can you be not that freeze response. I think, of course, not fighting, but also, making sure you're being proactive in those situations rather than reactive, I think is what comes into it, and has a hard time getting over those emotions. So really processing that, and how can you do that, and finding local resources to do so. I think that is so important for people to realize that it's okay to ask for help, especially when it comes to processing these situations in which we've been a victim or have witnessed crime or have been the person who has committed the crime. So I think breaking down that stigma and being able to ask for help and not feeling judged.
And with that too, the preventative piece that you mentioned, a person feels better when they have competencies in certain areas. So perhaps reaching out to a given resource, an agency or a counselor that can help empower you and help you navigate these situations, and to have action plans in place. Every institution has action plans in place. We as families have action plans in place here in this area when it comes to hurricanes. We have our bug out bags, and we get on the roadways and leave if we need to leave for a Category 3 or whatever. It's important to have that type of action plan for all sorts of events. When you have that played out in your mind, and in the event that this were to happen, I feel confidence in this, and when, God forbid, something were to happen, now you've thought it through beforehand on the front end, and you can leave. I've discussed with my wife and children, if something's going on in the grocery store, for example, we're at the grocery store and something happens, because unfortunately we live in a world where something could potentially happen. It's important to know where the exits are. Always be mindful of the exits, and the exits are not necessarily only the places where people tend to traditionally come in and out of in a given situation. There are back exits, there are delivery exits, there are other ways to get out of situations, and so to talk about the different scenarios in which you could find yourself, so that in the event that something were to happen, you can just get into that mode because you've rehearsed it in your mind already. It's a sad state of affairs that we are to discuss these things, but we must. We have drills for everything. We have drills for tornadoes. We have drills for active shooters in schools. We have drills for all sorts of things. We need to have these drills and these discussions in our homes with our families as well.
Right, Dr. Cerncy, one last comment from you on this. I think that, and what I'm hearing from you, Roy, is that being aware is always smart,
yes,
no matter what it is. You may not have to have a bug out bag. No, you gotta have one for hurricanes, but
yes,
for crime or for any different situation, but the awareness gives you a kind of a confidence.
Right.
Is that?
Right. In my car, for example, I have a device that if we live in Louisiana where there's water everywhere and we cross bridges.
The window breaker?
The window breaker thing, and that it cuts your seatbelt. God willing, I never have to use that, but it's there in the event that happens. If you get caught in flood waters and your car starts to drift, we flood in a matter of hours, and you can go into a canal. If you need to break that window and just cut it, it's important to have the mindset that you're going to be prepared for a number of different possible scenarios. We can't plan for everything, but to the extent that we can plan for some things, we feel more competent in a situation, we're less likely to be in a panic situation, and we can survive whatever situation more likely if we've thought it through beforehand.
Dr. Cerncy, preparation, are you agreeing with that just you're prepared?
Absolutely. My family raised me to be aware of my surroundings at all times, and that's not because of crime or anything like that, but you have to expect the unexpected sometimes. And unfortunately, we do live in a world where crime does happen and it is on the rise, and we have to just be prepared that, for one, even if we are proactive, we might not have the response that we want to have in that moment. But two, also knowing that it's okay to always just be aware of your surroundings, and it's okay to reach out and ask people for help. If you don't know where the emergency exits are, it's okay to ask somebody where they are so you know where to go. But I agree. I think preparation is key, and always having that almost like mental health preparedness kit, and just some of your go-to coping skills that you can utilize in any situation.
Oh, I like that. Carry around your mental health coping kit.
I like it too.
All right, Dr. Cerncy, we thank you so much for joining us and talking all this through. We appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much.
Okay, we'll be back in a minute. Stay with us.
Armani, she's my purpose. I'm here to walk with her, hold her hand until she can walk alone. Kind of like being a father in this world.
We're back talking about dealing with crime and rising crime rates. And man, it just affects all aspects of life when it hits you or hits near you.
Right.
You know, we were talking during the break, cybercrime. You know, a
Right.
crime rate that just you can't move away from that.
You don't even have to leave the house to be the potential victim of a crime. You could have identity theft or cybercrime take place, and when it happens, it can impact you in significant ways. You know, I'm aware of individuals who have had their Social Security number or their identity stolen, and it's taken years to resolve these issues. Or perhaps someone who had their credit card cloned or their debit card cloned, and for a series of days, for example, they can't have access to their accounts. And so what do you do to go buy food or put gas in a car when your account is frozen, even if it's just for a few days until they get it straightened out? It's an inconvenience, it is a hassle, and it's anxiety producing. You don't know how to proceed when those types of events take place.
Absolutely, and you not live in fear, but there is fear then, from then on, about anything you click.
Right, right. And that anxiety, and much of our world is online now, and our financial world is online. You know, we purchase things online, we pay bills online, and every time we enter that information in there, that anxiety that can perhaps ensue, is this a safe thing to do? How could this potentially impact me and my family down the road if someone were to gain access to this information? Because it could prevent us from meeting our needs, buying food, putting gas in a car, what have you.
Or a whole savings.
Or a whole savings.
You know, whatever happens, you know, it's just bad enough if you lose that laptop.
Right.
But if you lose your nest egg or you lose, you know, trying to fight that back, that's, you know, it just goes to show you that it can be more than just financial. It can be anxiety, fear that lasts for a long, long time.
Right, and it's hard to come back from that. You know, one can have a situation where their body has been assaulted and you deal with the scars and the scars heal. But the emotional scars, the psychological wounds that ensue with regard to crime, whether it be virtual crime, cybercrime, physical crime in the streets, the emotional and psychological scars can be long lasting. And, you know, when that happens, being able to seek help from a mental health provider that can be of assistance.
Because it can cascade. It can just fall. It can just all fall apart where you're afraid to go out. You're afraid to see anybody. You're afraid to trust anybody. You're afraid to trust the authorities even. You know, the people who are supposed to take care of you didn't. Right.
And that's no way to live. You know, it's important to be able to know that life does go on when you have experienced a crime of any sort, and to be able to regain that trust again. It could take time, but it's important to do so.
And counseling can help.
Counseling can help, yes.
You know, before the show ends, I just want to say that the University of Holy Cross is still offering a service.
Yes, the University of Holy Cross for several years now has been offering free telemental health counseling services to any resident in the state of Louisiana. So anyone who feels that they might need some sort of assistance to deal with this or any other issue, they can simply call the number on the screen. The administrative assistant will connect them with a clinical director who will assign a counselor in training. You can get services free of charge from our providers at the University of Holy Cross.
And no judgment. It doesn't matter what the issue is.
None whatsoever. We're there to help with an empathic ear, unconditional positive regard, and just being there for the individual who is struggling with whatever it is that they might be contending with at the time.
That's great. Okay, right, let's talk about some tips that you have for us.
Yes, absolutely. You know, we live in a time where we just need to be vigilant, and so we need to prepare our schedule on a daily basis to stay safe and have safety in mind. We need to be aware of our surroundings at all time, including our online surroundings. We need to stay in well-lit and populated areas and travel in groups whenever possible. Walk with your head upright. The person who's walking with their head upright and walks with confidence is less likely, statistically speaking, to be the victim of a crime than a person who is distracted and looking down. And limit your electronic device use. There are people who just walk around with their devices in hands and they're like digital zombies and crossing the streets. Put them down, be aware of your environment, and you're less likely to be the victim of a crime if you are in tune to what's going on around you.
You know, I think everybody knows that, but people get sucked up in this, and that's their world then, you know, instead of this is the world.
Absolutely.
You know, that's a really important thing to talk about.
Yeah, you don't want to get hit by a car, because you can get hit by a car if you're not looking up.
Or fall in a fountain.
Or fall in a fountain.
We've all seen that video, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Roy Salgado, for talking things through with us. And of course, we want to thank our guest today and all of your colleagues at the University of Holy Cross for helping us. And thank you for watching and being a part of Coping Today.